Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Paradigm Shifts podcast with your host, Keisha Kruger. I'm an organization development practitioner and executive coach, working with leaders to create positive changes in the workplace using behavioral science. My personal mission? Share science-based tools and leadership insights from the field that you can use in the workplace and beyond. Considering we spend about 3/4 of our lifetime at work, there is incredible science and organizational psychology that can be used to rethink the way we work, lead, and ultimately live. Join me as I speak with thought leaders and business leaders in practice, unpacking light bulb moments for paradigm shifts. And Jane is the owner and operator of Williams Leadership Group, focusing on coaching and leadership development for individuals, teams, and organizations. But she is also certified in a variety of assessments, including but not limited to the Actualized Leader Profile, the ALP 360, the Actualized Team Profile, as well as HBDI, Hermann Brain Dominance Instrument, the Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, as well as the Work in School Place Big Five, the Workplace 360, and the Values Profile. See, I told you she's an expert. She's also the Program Manager of Leadership Initiatives in the McColl School of Business at Queen's University of Charlotte, and she is a Partner and Operations Manager with William L. Sparks, an Associate serving clients and coaching. So excited for you to learn more about Jane, so be sure to visit the show notes. Hey, Jane, how are you?
Hi, Keisha. Good. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. I am so excited to chat with you about the role that assessments play in creating self-awareness. I feel like assessment tools in general can be widely misunderstood, but particularly self-assessment tools in terms of the value of building self-awareness for individuals. And so I want to spend some time chatting with you today on that, since you have such a wide lens and also experience with a variety of tools. And so what are the different types of assessment tools that can be utilized to build self-awareness?
That's a great question. So there are an array of assessments available, anywhere from personality assessments, leadership styles, communication styles, conflict mode, emotional intelligence. So, and that's just to name a few. There's thinking style, but they're really any type of feedback that you want to get regarding yourself, including a 360, where other people provide feedback on how they see you, is valuable. And one of the things we want to make sure that when we utilize assessments is first that we understand the context and the working definitions. For example, we have a values profile that we utilize on a regular basis with our clients. And if they don't understand the context or the definitions, the working definitions for that assessment in particular, it sometimes can be confusing. So you want to make sure that you level set that first. And when they get the feedback, then they can understand. I'll give you a little bit later about how that tripped me up when I took it the first time.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is I can go into like my results or debrief, for example, on an outcome of an assessment tool. And if I don't have the proper context into going into it, then I could misinterpret the information. And also that misleads me into understanding myself, right? So one of the things, and I know you'll talk about, is like the Workplace Big Five is a personality type assessment. But if I go in thinking the only thing I'm going to get out of this is understanding, let's say, my conflict mode, then I'm missing the whole picture of the value that that tool can bring. Is that kind of hitting it?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And there are a couple other sound points on assessments that I wanted to mention, and that is that you want to make sure that anytime you are taking an assessment that you've done sort of a little bit of research just to, like, again, understand the context, what it's about, and why you're getting this feedback. And when you answer the questions, you'll notice that oftentimes with assessments, they are asking the same question multiple different ways. And people are sometimes taken aback by that. But really, that is how they get to the reliability and the validity of the responses. They're able to culminate all of your responses and then determine how static or dynamic your responses are, meaning how often you answer the same way, or would they differ upon situation? And that can give you feedback on yourself. Is that something that you are okay with, or is it something you want to dig deeper into? And then finally, when you take assessments, some assessments like the Workplace Big Five. It's designed for at work. However, we encourage people to think about not yourself as an at work self, at home self, and the ball field self, but that you integrate all those together so that you're presenting your whole self. You may have situational responses. That's okay. But for authenticity, the goal is to integrate all of those pieces of yourself so that you're presenting your whole self all the time.
I love that you mentioned that, because sometimes I hear that it's almost like a compartmentalization of ourselves. Like we have our work self, we have our home self, but when you are gathering data and filling out these assessments, bringing your whole self into it, there is no separation, in my opinion. I think everyone has their own opinion on this, but in terms of like understanding yourself and how you can apply it to the context that you're in, the different domains, you make a great point when it comes to separating them versus like bringing your whole self authentically is just like very valuable.
Right.
And the other thing that you mentioned, the reliability and also the validity. So I also have heard that sentiment before with assessment tools and also in engagement surveys, which is a whole nother thing. We'll stay with our self-assessments, but why are the questions the same? And so it's important that you acknowledge that the validity and the reliability is those questions are similar to build in for those for those concepts to be measured and for us to be able to know if we were to take it again, how reliable is this assessment and the results going to be for me? And also, is it measuring what it says it's measuring, right? So what role do assessments play in self-awareness then?
Well, it's a way to get feedback about yourself. So if you want to think about if there was a way to have a helicopter view of your actions, thoughts, and feelings, you could do that. And you don't have the helicopter view. So taking an assessment when you're able to give responses in different scenarios sort of allows for that. And then once you take that information, then you can determine how you want to move forward with the information. And one of the things that we work with our clients on is that it's up to the person, the individual person, to make meaning of the results. So, for example, if something is working for you and you get that feedback, that's up to you. If it's something you're going to further develop, again, that's up to you. We can help you explore that. So the important thing is that as an individual, you have ownership of your riding the ship and what items you'd like to. And it's development within yourself. Assessments are really not to be used for hiring or remedial work. It's really for development.
Mm. And would you recommend that if someone is doing a self-assessment tool, that they have someone that supports them in understanding what development looks like and what areas they want to take initiative on?
I would. Most assessments, if not all assessments, are typically required to be delivered by a certified practitioner. So they've gone through training. So they're, for example, I'm certified in the Actualized Leader Profile. And that with that certification, it allows me to debrief the results with an individual. Likewise, with the Workplace Big Five, Paradigm Personality issued a certification for that. So then beyond that, working together with a coach, and, as a facilitator, I'm also trained as a coach, then you can work with the person to develop those aspects out as far as they'd like to go. So having just the results is really stops short of the whole process. It's really the results plus creating an individual development plan to work and move the person towards their goal.
Mm. And depending on what assessment they're taking, that development plan could look different, correct?
Absolutely. And that is one of the great things about if you take retro assessments. Some people do that. And, really with assessments, they oftentimes when people work with assessments, it's prescriptive. Take this assessment, I'll give you these results, we'll do this plan. But what you really want to look for in someone that you partner with is tell them that you need, let that be the driver of what assessment you take instead of a prescriptive, this is what we offer. But, you want to be able to have the tool meet the need versus the opposite. And then when you go from there, oftentimes we'll have folks take multiple assessments. And then when you have a situation like that, you can triangulate the data, which sounds very scientific, but basically you're looking for themes across different feedback tools. And then as you move forward, that can help you develop out that plan.
That brings me to another question that, do you want to take just one of these, or is it important to have that multi-data point perspective on yourself, since they do give you different lenses to look through?
I think starting with one is a great place to start. You can't, bite elephant all at once. You've got to do it, a little bit at a time. So I think starting with one is a great way to start the feedback process, and then move along to the left. You want another, if you have an assessment, it gives you some feedback, but we're ready to start like, I'd like to develop that out. Maybe there's another assessment that you can look at with your coach or someone that you're working with to help explore that further.
Yeah. So Jane, can you walk me through some of the assessments that you're familiar with that generally you would see an individual take, and also what value they bring?
Sure. So I'm certified in several different assessments, and they have different lenses that they look through. So one of them is the Hermann Brain Dominance Instrument, which is someone's thinking style, and that really affects their communication. Another one is the Thomas Kilmann Diagnostic, which is conflict mode. We have the Workplace Big Five, which is a personality. The personality is really different than the ones I've just mentioned, because much of that is genetically predisposed. You've got genetics and sort of the environment that go with that, versus something like the values profile that we also use. That's completely learned. You're not born with your values. Those are developed over time. The Actualized Leader Profile, as well as Actualized Team Profile, which provides individual leadership styles and leadership within groups. And then finally, a 360, the Actualized 360, which is compared, that takes someone's individual responses, compares them to external responses from different folks that they either work with, manage, co-workers, that kind of thing.
No, thank you. That's really helpful. And I'm sure there's so many assessments out there. But for those who are interested in learning a little bit more about the Actualized Leader Profile, which you just mentioned, and the Actualized Team Profile, and the ALP 360, I actually did an episode with Dr. Will Sparks, who authored those assessment tools. That's episode number 2 for anyone who's interested in going back. But that one was about managing your leadership shadow so it doesn't manage you. And I think that would be helpful to get a little bit more of a deeper dive into that tool, because that likely will be something that you'll want to use for a leadership style development plan, correct?
Yes, exactly. And I think all of these different tools are, it's basically like a thermometer. When you want to go get a reading of someone's temperature, you use a thermometer. And so these assessments are simply tools to do the same thing, but on your own self-inventory.
I love that. And so in terms of like the question, why do I want to build my self-awareness? There are some unintended consequences or benefits, if you will, of increasing self-awareness. Can you share what some of those might be for us?
Absolutely. So one of the things that is a lot of folks don't expect is that by understanding yourself better, it helps you understand others better. And so it's a little bit of a trigger effect. It's sort of like, well, okay, I know this about myself. How would that help me with others? But it increases communication. It helps you understand where someone else may be coming from. And then it can increase your ability to have productive conversations and relationships. And it's not just at work, it's at home. I've found that sometimes people will go at this as a little rather this thing at work. And then they realize that it unfolds at home too. And so you don't have to just be limited to just this one relationship that you think needs to be tweaked. It actually spans out across those different aspects of your life.
I mean, it's so important I love that you said understanding yourself better helps you understand others, because as humans, we're wired to be relationship driven. We are relational in nature. And I think it's so critical to think of the psychological perspective here, because from that perspective, other human beings, other relationships around us essentially are mirrors that project back to us things that we need to better understand ourselves, but also how we can relate better to others. So it is that constant, push and pull dynamic. And one of the levers you can pull on to just have a better, more synergistic impact on those around you is yourself. And that's something you have control over. So if we take that initiative, right, we pull that into our control and to our internal locus of control, then we can really make some big impacts, which is really amazing.
Exactly.
So I have heard in the past, being certified on some assessments myself when I'm doing debriefs, maybe some results don't really resonate with people, or maybe they get a result back and they're like, that's not sticking. So I'm curious if you've experienced that in your time as a certified practitioner and administrator of different assessments. And if you have a story you can share, maybe around a time when a self-assessment tool, didn't resonate with you, or the results didn't resonate.
Well, sure. I'll use myself as an example just because, I think that makes it a little bit more personal, and I also like to obviously protect those that we work with, their confidentiality. But an example would be a couple of years ago, I took the values profile. It's a terrific profile offered by Paradigm Personality, and it's paired with the Workplace Big Five. And there are 16 values. And when you get the feedback, they're ranked 1 to 16. And so it's very difficult for all 16 to be number one, or even in the top 5, because it's ranked. And so there are some of the values are things like helping, justice, intellect, and my number 2 was style. And style, the definition of style was likes the finer things. And it's a little bit longer than that, but that kind of gives you the gist of it. And I kind of was like, okay, well, I thought maybe helping, relationships, and some of these other more benevolent values would be a little bit higher for me. And so I kind of rejected it, but thought, it's my responses. But I just figured I'd kind of tailor it. I really wouldn't. I was making meaning of it, but I was like, okay, I'm going to work on something else. I got other feedback, and I'll just let that one sit. And it took me about 2 weeks, and I finally realized why that it actually was important to me. And the reason I had scored so high on that was that at the time, my husband had been laid off. There was kind of a mini recession going on. And we had some deferred maintenance around our home. Our garage door opener was not working. We had to do it manually. The third eye on the stove would not work. And every time that assessment asked me if I liked finer things, I was like, sign me up. And so that did not make this less valuable. But once I realized that, I was like, that makes sense. And you know what? That's okay. That value going over is fine. And if I took it again today, it still may be there for another reason. Values are something that are not static. They're dynamic. They change over time. And, some assessments, they're pretty much, if you took it in a year from now, you pretty much score the same. Values, not so much, because what's going on in your life is really changes, and what you're spending your time on changes. And so that's how the values are. This particular survey and assessment is evaluated. But, I think the bottom line for me was that I had to make meaning of that. And once I was able to assess, well, is it okay where it is, or do I want to really work on moving something to a different spot? And for me, it was okay, because that's what I was going through at the time. And the opposite of that is I had taken another assessment, the workplace, and there's a measurement on there for reach for stability and how reactive you are. And I scored highly reactive. And I was like, oh, that doesn't sound very good, but it sounds like I'm running, after a fire all the time. And what I realized is that it serves me well a lot of the time. I'm very responsive to email. I'm very responsive to our clients and give good customer service. And, at the same time, what about that doesn't work for me? And I had gotten feedback that you do give good responses quickly, but maybe there's some spelling errors. And so how do you take feedback and incorporate the positive pieces, but then also the pieces that you might need to highlight and make one? And that was kind of the aha moment for me, where reactive works. That's who I am inherently. That workplace big five is a lot of genetics. Naturally, I'm reactive. Okay, how can I pull back from that, though, and moderate and use that for good when I need to, but also be aware when there are issues that sort of allow me to get kind of in a rock and a hard place and might not serve me so well.
Yeah, and that's the moderating variable in all of this, I feel like, is self-awareness, right? So if you are open enough to feedback to integrate some of those areas that you may not love about yourself because that's what society deems as not a good or positive trait, then what you can do, and what I know about the workplace big five, is it's who you are, not what you do, right? So then with that self-awareness, you consciously get the opportunity to choose different if you choose to do different. So if you do not want to show up in a reactive way, then how, knowing this information that that's more of your natural style, how can you choose differently? So I think that's also like a huge power of just self-awareness, is knowing yourself. You now can compensate and make adjustments.
Absolutely. And I think one misnomer is that people oftentimes will think that they have to change. And nobody is asking people to change who they are naturally. That would never be what we would suggest, because that would go against your natural tendency and would be a strain. It would not work. I mean, you can't sustain that over time. However, it's just like anything where if you know that something is too much, you back off a little bit, and being able to sort of moderate again, that your behavior and your responses can serve you well, and knowing just when to do that and when not to is a lot of that self-awareness piece.
Yeah. And so I'm just curious, in organizations, when it comes to utilizing these tools, do you recommend leaders just start with one in an organization, or does it fit the need for certain programs? Like I might use the ALP with a leadership development program, but the workplace big five I might use within teams, for example, so that they have an understanding of how personalities, types and traits may be leveraged within a team. Like what's a good starting point for a leader who maybe is hearing this and saying, I want to introduce assessment tools to build self-awareness in my organization, but I'm not sure where to start?
Yeah, I think any of the ones that we've mentioned today are great. I do think something like the Actualized Leader Profile is super, because it gives the person, it's really about themselves. It's less about how they communicate with others or how their team functions. It's more about their own self-journey. And with that, there's an exponential sort of advantage of gaining that self-awareness for managers, for individuals on teams. Then you can kind of spill it out and go out to, okay, well, we want to work on conflict, so let's work on utilize the conflict mode. And so I think it just depends on where you want to start. But I think really, I met with someone the other day and they wanted to build out their managerial skills, and they were a people leader and it was new for them and they wanted to do that. But where we started and landed was, let's work on your self-awareness. Then we can, add that in. But let's start with you. And that sometimes it's hard for folks, because I think it's really about how I manage people in the task. But it's really about the task. It's more about us as all individuals and the growth that we can have. And then you can kind of get to the task or, the relationships that go beyond that.
That's a great point, because when you have a conflict on the team, you might want to go right to the conflict mode instrument, right? You might want to immediately jump to that, but pulling back and saying, okay, how can I learn about myself first as a leader and build that awareness, and then move forward and see where that lands and what adjustments I can make to show up as the best version of myself for this team. And then we can work on conflict mode. And I think what's also important to note about assessment tools, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that they're not telling us what we don't know. They're telling us they're telling us information that we already do know intuitively or instinctively, or we've heard from our spouses or our friends or our family members at some point. But what these assessment tools do is give us a framework and a universal language that we can all be speaking on the same page around. Is that right?
You are right. And I think when you said a minute ago about the leader that wanted to go straight to Kilmann Conflict Mode and not start with themselves, but also let their team take the self-assessment. And that way they get feedback, because it oftentimes can expedite the growth when everyone is on the same page, they all share the same language, and they're able to have that unified understanding of how they're going to move forward.
Yeah, because especially with the ALP, that's about your motive needs. And so if I understand my motive needs, you understand yours, then we can make some adjustments on this team. I love that.
And people do cues. If I understand mine, but I understand yours, and I can have kind of these cues of what may increase our ability to manage conflict better, or, accomplish a task together, etc.
And the ALP, for example, is not just for leaders. Like you said, it could be for individual contributors. And a lot of these tools that you're talking about are for all levels of an organization, not just the senior lead. It's not reserved just for senior leadership. I think that's also a misnomer, is that self-awareness instruments are reserved for more of our senior leaders or our middle management. But I think everyone deserves to be more self-aware.
Yes, you're right. And, another thing about this is that oftentimes leaders will hire replicas of themselves. So there's a lot of leaders that are on teams. And sometimes with assessments, it can give you the ability to go across or outside of your team, to have someone at the table to bring another lens to a project or something that you need outside feedback on, so that, one, we don't want to build a team that's all like one person, but then if that has happened, how can we diversify and bring in other opinions to the table so that you have a really well-rounded discussion about opportunities on, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So that's another way that assessments can give you this feedback on folks. And again, it's all shared willingly. It wouldn't be that anyone would provide feedback on someone to a manager without the person's permission. But if that happens and you do agree to share, it's a great way to, like I say, invite other people to the table to expand the conversation.
Yeah, that diversity of thought is so key, not only within teams, but just to overall growth of an organization. So thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's important to surface. Well, believe it or not, this has been, such a, the time is already ending, and I've got one final question for you. My final question I ask all of my guests is, what's the most recent paradigm you've experienced, paradigm shift, whether it's related to this work or something in our field?
I would say it is related to this work, because in coaching folks that are trying to increase self-awareness, one of the biggest paradigm shifts or aha moments for me is that it is not transactional. So it's not like you go and you make this deposit and you can then create this withdrawal and then I have self-awareness. It's really a run of different things. So if, for example, we had a client that was learning candor, and they did work on finding their own voice, but what they found, a way to kind of get at that, was actually to give other people a voice, which sometimes it's counterintuitive to what you think is going to happen. But it's almost like if you think the student becomes the teacher, is that we're providing someone else with something that you might not have, and by that, there's learning for you and growth for you. So it's this, kind of but you don't intend house these results. And so I would just encourage folks that as they explore their self-awareness, that they're open to new patterns of thinking and ways of sort of solving for X. Because if you have something that you want to develop out, to think of and work with someone to help you think of different ways to do that.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's what the paradigm shifts concept is all about, is being able to think fundamentally different about different things and to introduce new thinking and belief patterns into our worldview, right? And so that really is like the foundation and key cornerstone of this entire podcast. So it's a really nice way to connect. Thank you, Jane, for doing all of the incredible work that you're doing. The impact that you're making to individuals, teams, and organizations is so significant, and I just appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a review, rate, and subscribe wherever you're listening. If you know a business leader in practice or friend who you think would be interested in this episode, please consider sharing it with them. I am so grateful for your support. For more updates, you can follow us at Paradigm Shifts Podcast on Instagram. See you on the next episode.